In the last episode of the series, I covered how I create multi-layered ambient guitar pieces. In this session, I want to show you how I take a multi-layer piece and mix it down so it sounds like one cohesive piece of music. So it sounds like a record. All right, I've got Logic Pro pulled up, and I've got the same sample piece from episode 4 pulled up, the hard road from my album Layers. As we discussed, it's a 4-layer piece comprised of guitar, Frippertronics, drums, and a synthesizer bass. So let's go ahead and think about this mix down. We're going to be doing a couple of different things. First off, we want to get everything balanced in terms of the volume. So let me go ahead and pick a spot here in the middle so we can hear how everything is currently balanced. Okay? Now, guitar is very prominent. That's because I'm an ambient guitarist. The drums and the synth bass are going to be secondary, and that's by design. So if we look at the Logic mixer here, you can see that guitar is set pretty much to 0 dB. It's at full scale, right, on the track there, on the channel. And in terms of the drums, I've got them pulled back about 4.2 decibels. If I leave it all the way up, let's bring it up, it's going to be a little too loud for me. Yeah, it's just a little too loud. So I bring it down and it kind of reins it in. The Frippertronics, I really want to ride underneath. So you can see that this is set to negative 16.8 in terms of the fader position. And if you're looking closely, you can also see that the level is changing, and that is because I've got some automation going with this Frippertronics piece in terms of the volume. So if we look at the beginning where it's just the Frippertronics, I've brought them kind of way up. Okay? But once everything starts kicking in, you'll see that I bring the level of the Frippertronics layer down. So just watch and listen as I bring in the main guitar. And you can see in the automation that the volume level is just decreasing as we approach where the drums and the synth bass come in. And by the time we get there, the Frippertronics layer is pretty low. It's kind of creating a texture way underneath. In terms of the synth bass, I talked about this last time, but I just really want it there to add a subtle low end. So it is very low in the mix. Okay? And although on the fader, it's still set to 0 dB, it's just low in the mix. It's not a loud part. And if we put it all together then, just listen to it again. That's kind of some basic balancing going on. What you'll see also is that none of these tracks are panned. They're all dead center, and that's because every track, it's a stereo track. That's not always the case with my pieces, but it is the case with this piece. All right, so let's examine each of these 4 tracks a little bit more in detail to see what I've got going on in terms of effects plugins. So first up is the guitar track, and as you can see, I've got 4 effects on that track. The first one is a de-esser, and that is simply to knock down the slaps that I'm doing on the strings. They're a little loud. And you can see there that the de-esser is catching those slaps and just bringing them down a little bit. Next up is a channel strip from Isotope called Neutron, and I'm using it just to basically equalize a little bit. It's got a little bit of excitation going on, a little saturation going on, and a little bit of compression going on. Not really much at all. You can see there's a little compression. Equalizers, very minimal. And then this module here called Sculptor is a little bit like the Soothe plugin by Oak Sound. Yeah, that can kind of help control resonant frequencies. That's all that's going on here. It's pretty straightforward. Then I've got a tiny little bit of the Valhalla Shimmer Reverb plugin. And I'll just let you look at the controls there if you wish. And it's very subtle, but it adds just a little bit of that shimmery goodness. And then finally, I've got the Soft Tube Tape plugin that adds a reel-to-reel tape kind of vibe to the track. And I like the way it turned out. All right, so let's hop down to the Frippertronics side of the equation. We've already talked about the automation going on there, but again, as far as actual plugins on the track, again, I'm using the Neutron 3 channel strip. You can see the equalizer is kind of weird. When I went to mix it, it was really muddy, so I decided to pull out some of the low end. Let me disable that equalizer. Yeah. So you can hear how kind of muddy that was. So I did have to work with that a little bit. So pulling out that, and then Sculptor, again, is a resonance control, a resonance detector. And you can see it's basically acting like a dynamic EQ. It's taking a lot out between 200 and 300 hertz. And I'll just mention with the Frippertronics style parts that I do with EBO, there does tend to be a lot of buildup and resonance in the 200 to 300 hertz range. And I would recommend, as you're considering mixing down your parts, to be looking out for these frequencies that are really poking out in some of the parts. And those are the ones to really kind of hone in on and focus in on. A couple of the other things I have is, again, another instance of the Soft Tube Tape plugin. And then I do have a FabFilter Reverb on the EBO. It's pretty subtle, but it's there, right? It's a reverb. So that's the guitar and the Frippertronics piece. Again, we'll just play them together here momentarily so you can kind of recalibrate. Let's go ahead to the synth bass then and see what's going on there. As I mentioned earlier, I think last time, it's the Arturia Pigments synthesizer, really great sounding synth. And for this part, let me get over here. For this part, I have a couple things going. One is the Logic Overdrive, which is basically just a distortion plugin. So I added a little bit of distortion to the bass. So if I turn it off, yeah, I'm using it to raise the level a little bit, and you can hear that there's a little bit of drive. And I've got the tone turned down, so it's pretty, there's not much top end going on in the overdrive. The next plugin is the Logic Fat plugin, and I'm using this to enhance the bass, using it for some compression, and some saturation. I've got quite a bit going on here. In a way, I'm using the Fat FX plugin as a channel strip because I've got a little bit of EQ going on. I've got the distortion. I've got the bass enhancement. That's kind of like EQ and some compression. I'm even doing a little bit of hard clipping to control and squish that bass sound. And then, this is interesting, I've got a compressor, and it is sidechained to the drums. So when the drums are hitting hard, I'm squishing down the level of the synth bass. That's kind of cool, right? So I want the drums to pop out, and I want the bass to kind of disappear a little bit. Let me pull in the drums here so you can kind of hear what's going on. So you can hear a little pumping up and down in the bass itself. I think it will still, let's see, I think it'll still happen yet. There we go. You can see the drum, every time the drum hits, it is lowering the level of the synth bass and creating that pumping sound. Now, this is a Logic compressor, but many compressors, probably your recording software's compressor, can sidechain to another track so that the other track can control the amount of compression for the instrument that you're actually going to compress. It's an interesting trick that audio engineers have been using for decades. All right, and then finally, on the synth bass, I have another instance of the Softtube tape, reel-to-reel tape plugin. So that's my synth bass, and that's my Frippertronics, and that's my main guitar. Let's listen to all three together. Let's consider the effects plugins that I used on the drums. First up is a little bit of channel EQ, and this is the stock Logic equalizer plugin. I'm just dropping out some low end, a little bit of 500, and a little bit of 4K. The drums were just a little too muddy sounding in the low end, so dropping out some of that low end really helped out a lot. And then after that, I'm compressing the drums. And again, I'm using the Logic compressor. There's no side chain here, so this literally is compressing the drums. It's not a ton of compression, but I'm catching some of the big peaks and just kind of smoothing it out some. And then next after that is the ever-present tape plugin by Softtube. And then finally, I've got a plugin called The Velvet Machine by a company called Phonolith. And it's a granular kind of reverb plugin that sounds really cool. So let me turn it off here. Yeah, it's kind of plain. Bring it in. And I kept the settings such that the density of the grains is very low, so you can hear individual grains. The reason why I did this is that I feel like in the overall mix, it adds this underlying rhythmic texture that complements the drums, but it's very subtle because it's such a low level. Let's bring in everything here for a minute. You really can't hear it very distinctly in the overall mix. Maybe if you have better ears than me, which you probably do. If you're listening on headphones, you probably can hear the grains, but it's very subtle and it kind of rides under everything else. The only other thing that I did to mix this piece was on the master bus, I added a Reverb plugin. I don't always add reverb plugins on the master bus. Sometimes I'll set up an auxiliary bus like this one right here, and then I'll feed all of the channels that I want to have reverb. I'll feed everything in individually. In this case, however, I'm not actually using this bus, but I'm just putting the Chroma Reverb plugin on the master bus because I wanted to create an overall space for the entire mix. And as you can see, it's set very, very low. It's set down to 5% mix. So you can kind of hear it under the covers, but it just adds another textural layer into the overall mix and kind of brings everything together. I'm avoiding using the word glue, which is way overused, but it does help bring everything together by helping all the tracks or all the parts and pieces sound like they're in the same physical space. Finally, in the overall mix, there's a couple of things that I have on my mix bus that generally are always there. One is a multimeter. So this is the Logic multimeter, and this allows me just to see what's going on. There's a couple of things that I always look for when I'm mixing. One, obviously, is going to be the level. Where am I sitting in terms of loudness for the mix? Now, I'm not talking about mastering and preparing the track for release to Spotify or a CD or wherever, Bandcamp. I'm just talking about the overall mix when I'm actually mixing down. And the overall level could vary quite a bit. In this piece, if you look at the LUFS level over here where it says 22.5, so I'm not being real concerned about pushing levels way up. As you can see, my peaks are running in the -10 range, and that's okay. This is a 24-bit, 48 kilohertz project. That means I have 144 decibels of dynamic range. If I take 10 decibels off, I still have 134, 133 left. Plenty of room without running into noise floor or anything like that. So that would be my advice, is don't worry about pushing things super high when you're mixing. Give yourself plenty of headroom. One of the other things that I like to look at as I'm mixing is the stereo image of the piece. And I'm using this goniometer, I think is how it's pronounced. There are several different ways to look at stereo imaging. One is in the analyzer portion of this meter. If you look at the correlation section here, where it says correlation, and we've got a red to green scale. Ideally, we want to keep that moving bar between the middle and to the right. So the middle would be 0, the right would be 1, the left would be -1. The further you get towards 1, the more in phase your piece is. If you go all the way to 1 and it just stays there, like all the way to the right, that means you're in mono. And if you go all the way to the left, you're basically totally out of phase and you're not going to hear anything. So ideally, you want to keep that bar bopping around between 0 and 1, like this one is doing. Also, one of the other things I like to do is use the Logic Gain plugin. Here it is. And the gain plugin has a mono switch. Now, if you're using Reaper, each individual track has a mono switch. The stereo bus has a mono switch. It's very convenient. Logic doesn't have that, so I use the gain plugin to do that. And a lot of times when I'm mixing, I will turn mono on. So even though I'm going to deliver this in stereo, right, I'm going to turn mono on so I can hear everything in mono and just get a feel for what it sounds like in mono. And what I'm listening for is just making sure I can still hear everything. And in particular, since I use lots of delays and reverbs and modulation, I want to make sure that all of those different types of time-based effects aren't creating phasing issues that are going to cause the signal to collapse if it goes into mono. Because frankly, when people listen to music outside of a stereo system or headphones, you're going to get a lot of mixing crosstalk between the two stereo channels. And if you're listening on an Alexa speaker or a HomePod or something like that, the stereo image is going to be non-existent. So it's important to understand what your piece is going to sound like in mono. And again, if we go back to that multimeter, if you look at the correlation here, you can see it's all the way to the right. And if we look at the phase meter here, right? Now, if I turn mono off, and this meter is good because I can see the sides, the left and right material, but I can also see I've got a good solid vertical line, which is the middle or the mono. It's not really mono, but it's like the middle of the stereo image is nice and solid, right? So I'm pretty happy with the way this looks. A lot of times what I'll do for stereo imaging when I'm mixing also is just solo a particular track and see what it looks like. So here's just the guitar. Looks pretty good. So if we look at our drums, that's great. And if we look at our Frippertronics, yeah, it's okay, but this is where phase cancellation is going to come in. Check that out. So if I mono it, let's hear what happens. It's okay. It doesn't fall apart completely, but it definitely loses the power or the strength of the signal when I collapse it to mono. Now, the good news is that this is way low in the mix, and it's supposed to be way low in the mix. So it's okay if it's a weaker kind of signal. And then finally, that synth bass, let's go ahead and solo that. Yeah. That's almost totally mono. So that's perfect. So that's how I think about stereo imaging. I think it's a really important topic for all of us who are creating ambient styles of music. We don't want our music to totally fall apart if somebody's listening to it in mono versus stereo. So I hope this mixing walkthrough was helpful for you. It's the way I think about things and the way I kind of go about mixing multi-track ambient guitar pieces. In the next episode of this series, I'm going to cover mastering this track and then preparing it for distribution to Spotify, Bandcamp, CD, etc. So I'll see you soon over on that video.